Hey guys, we are now ranking the Valkyrie Profile 2 dungeons. Now the reason why I wanted to rank the dungeons specifically, there's two reasons. First of all, I did consider ranking all of the characters in the game, but then I realised that that would take quite a while to do, and it would take a lot of research, and it's complicated because of the Iron area, and yeah, I thought, well, maybe one day I could do that, but right now is not the time. The second reason is because, well, I feel that the dungeons are kind of like the heart and soul of this game. Outside of the towns, of course. Like, this is a game that you play to explore, take in all of the sights. And dungeons are what you're mainly going through, so obviously that's kind of what this game is all about. So I thought it would be a good idea to rank the dungeons of the game instead of the characters. So without further ado, let's begin with the first dungeon in the game, the Lost Forest. So the Lost Forest is the tutorial dungeon of the game. There's not really much here, it's pretty basic. The music is alright, but it's not really anything special compared to the rest of the soundtrack. It's kind of foreboding in a way, but we're talking Valkyrie Profile 2 here. Like, Valkyrie Profile 2's got some bangers. So when you're ranking the dungeons of Valkyrie Profile 2, you've got to bear that in mind, that if it's not really good, it's probably going to be on the lower tiers. And that's why I'm going to put it in C tier. Now that might sound like I'm insulting this first area of the game, but the reason why I put it in C tier is because this dungeon is very short, there's really not much to it, it's kind of uneventful, it's just a place, there's not really too much to say about it, it's just some basic ass forest. The only thing that I can mention is that there is a glitch in PCSX2 which this area is famous for, and it kind of messes with the aesthetic of the area. That's really the only thing that's noteworthy about this area, really. So we're moving on to the second dungeon in the game, which is the Royal Underground Path, which connects to the Lost Forest. Now the interesting thing about the Royal Underground Path is the music of the Royal Underground Path is kind of like a remix of the song that plays in the Lost Forest. And the thing that I like about this song is that once you reach a certain point in the song just completely changes. And when it changes, it gets epic. And like only for a brief moment, but it really starts to pick up, and then it just goes back to like the more steady pace. And I love that because it's kind of giving you a taste of what's to come. Like Lost Forest is just very steady, very foreboding, whereas this pumps you up more, and I like that. But it really gets really good in the second half of the song. Now the dungeon itself, well, here's the thing: the Royal Underground Path, the first time round, it's great. But the second time round, it's kind of a pain because you're going back through this dungeon again. The biggest problem with this dungeon is not necessarily the dungeon itself, it's just how many times you have to go through it. Like, you have to go through this dungeon 3 times. No joke, 3 freaking times. And it's so that you can connect to Dipan, and this is the only way to get to Dipan in the game, because you can't take a boat. You have to go through this dangerous cave to get there. So yeah, because of that, it's not really a dungeon that I would consider to be like amazing. It's better than the Lost Forest, but at the same time, I'm putting this in C tier as well, just simply for that. But I'm putting it on a higher C because I do like this dungeon a lot more. It's definitely more intricate than the Lost Forest. There's a lot more places to roam around. It's just the fact that you have to go backtrack through it so many times, and it gets old. But it is a bit of a tutorial dungeon, and you get some of your first time hair here, so it's very important. It's just, it overstayed its welcome. Right, so next we have Dipan Castle. More precisely, the Dipan Castle Underground. So, Dipan Castle itself, there's no enemies here, it's just a castle. It looks really nice, as you would expect a castle to look, but I'm not really talking about the castle itself mainly. I'm talking about the dungeon. Now, the Dipan Castle dungeon, much like the Royal Underground Path, you do backtrack to it, but you only backtrack to it twice. So, yeah, you don't go through it 3 times. But at the same time, it's a very basic dungeon, and it's got more like fast-paced music than the Lost Forest. It's more on the lines of the Royal Underground Path in that regard. And the aesthetic, well, it's not too much different. It's just basically an underground area full of brick and like dripping water and enemies. And that's when you finally get like the battle areas where it's not just like this flat plain, like there's kind of like corridors in the battle arena and stuff. It kind of gets weird and you get like a little basic puzzle or whatever you have to do through it. There's also references to Valve Profile 1 as well in this dungeon, which makes sense because you do go here in Valve Profile 1. So yeah, as I say, it's another one of those dungeons where you backtrack through it again. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad dungeon, it's just kind of whatever, and whatever isn't really good enough for me. So once again, I'm going to put this in C tier, because it is really just, like, it's not as good as the Royal Underground Path. I like that dungeon more, but having to go back through it again, like really? Do we have to backtrack through it again? Like, come on. But it's better than the Lost Forest, I'll definitely give it that. Right, so next we have the first field area of the list, and that is the Kythena Plains. I fucking adore this place. Like, I really do. Like, going on the grassy plain across like the cliffs and you can see the sea on the horizon. Like, it's just fucking amazing. Like, I just love the aesthetic of this area. It might seem simple, but I just love it. Like, it's very nostalgic to me, is this aesthetic. And I really love, like, just how all the petals are just flying through the air. And the music in this area is also fucking amazing as well. Like, I swear to God, like, this song could play in any video game, like any open world video game. Like, this song would work. It's one of those songs that if you're playing an MMORPG, replace the music with this and you've got a better game. I'm just gonna say that because I fucking love the music in this area. It's called Neighboring Infinity. It might not seem too amazing to some people, but to me it's special. I love that song a lot. Like, it just emphasizes, like, it has that feeling of a very peaceful stroll, but man, it's more than just that. It's just an amazing song in general. And when you combine that with the backdrop of like the sea in the background and like the petals, it just makes for a fantastic aesthetic. So where am I putting this? Because obviously I really like this area a lot, but it is very basic. It's a very simple area because it's a field area and you're just going from one end to the next. There's no treasure chests, there's just a few enemies to fight, and yeah, it's on a flat plain, so there's not really too much to say. But I'm going to put this in A tier. I like the Kythena Plains. I do. Like, I always look forward to going here, and it's just one of those areas that I just like to sit back, like kill all the enemies, so that I can just sit back and just take in all the atmosphere and the scenery, because it's a spectacle. So next, we have the Serdberg Mountain Ruins. Now, this is where you meet Leone and Arngrim for the first time, and there's quite a lot to do here. It's like your first real dungeon of the game, because this is where the difficulty starts to go up a little, and you really have to be on the ball now, because the training wheels are off, and the enemies are really tough here. You have to be more careful. There's a few simple puzzles, but nothing too difficult. I do feel that this dungeon is definitely a lot more complex than any of the dungeons beforehand, but it's not too difficult to the point that it's going to be hard for you to get through it. And if you're struggling, you can always grind a little bit in the Kythena Plains, so it's not really a big deal. I mean, it is a very standard dungeon, but it's a pretty decent dungeon. It's a very well-rounded dungeon. I mean, the music is probably one of the most standard tracks in the game, but it's still decent. I think as an overall package, this dungeon is very straightforward, simple, and it's also got enough depth to it that makes it enjoyable. So I'm going to put it at B tier because I think this is kind of like the middle of the road in regards to like, it's simple. It's not like the most extravagant dungeon on this list, but it's kind of like the benchmark of what I would expect from a Valkyrie Profile 2 dungeon, and it's kind of like a taste of things to come in the future because they only get more complex from here. Okay, so the next dungeon is the Ancient Forest. Now, once you've beaten the Wyvern in the Serdberg mountain ruins, you can go to Coriander, and there is someone that you can talk to there who will open up a new dungeon, and that dungeon is the Ancient Forest. However, you could instead go to another dungeon, which is a story dungeon, which I will bring up after this, but if you want to, you can do this dungeon instead. This dungeon, it's a nice dungeon. The music in this dungeon is one of those songs that grows on you over time. Like, when you first hear it, it's not really the most amazing song in the game, and it really isn't, but it's one of those songs that does grow on you the more you hear it. And I do actually kind of like the song in this area a little bit. It's not my favourite song in the game, but I do like it. And the area itself, it's got some nice looking areas, especially when you go deep in, you can see the lake in the background. I really like that part. And yeah, other than that, it's pretty simple, but I do like this dungeon. It's nice and simple, but I enjoy it. I like it. For that reason, I'm actually going to probably put it, I don't know where I'll put it between these two. They are both very good in different ways, but I do prefer the music of this one a little bit more than the Serdberg Mountain Ruins personally, so I'm going to put it on B tier. Right, next we have Audoula Temple on the Lake. This dungeon is the first dungeon that will hit you like a truck. This is the dungeon that, when I first got to this dungeon, like, it had a huge impact on me. Like, the music, the atmosphere, everything about it is top notch. I fucking love it. This is definitely one of the best dungeons I've ever seen in a JRPG, by far. Like, everything about it is just so fucking amazing. It kind of reminds me of the Mortavia aqueducts in Castlevania Curse of Darkness. Very samey sort of like feel, except this one looks a lot nicer. That's the best way to put it. And the music, oh my god, the music in this area is so serene and calming. Like, it really is, and just like the Kythena Plains, you just want to stand there and just take in all the atmosphere. But the dungeon itself introduces more intricate battle areas because now it's kind of a little bit more corridory, but it's actually on a bridge instead of like on a walled corridor. And there's also a part where you can fall off that bridge, like you can fall off the top bridge onto like a lower bridge, which is pretty cool. And yeah, there's some IKEA here. There's a bit more complexity in the puzzles, particularly if you want to get all of the seal stones and the treasure chests. So that's another good thing about this dungeon. It's one of those dungeons that you're going to spend a lot of time in if you want to get everything, but it feels rewarding to get everything if you're going for that. And if you're not going for that, if you're just passing through, you're still going to be involved somewhat, but it's not going to be too much. The thing I love about Valkyrie Profile 2 is none of the dungeons really, except maybe for one, which I'll get to, really push you to like solve puzzles or anything like that. It's like, instead you're just kind of like given some simple puzzles to do that anyone can do, including my stupid ass, and then you can like just progress. But if you want to indulge, it's there, and this dungeon has plenty of that. It has plenty of side things and distractions where you can just decide, oh, I'm just going to go and try and get this chest, but I have to do this photon puzzle to do it, and I have to kind of like somehow get up to that ledge by using this monster and using photons to teleport me to the ledge so I can get the chest or the seal stone and stuff like that. There's quite a lot more of that in this dungeon than the other dungeons, I would say, up to this point. So for that reason, like, this is where it's going to get tough, isn't it? Because it's going to be on the top somewhere, because I do like this dungeon a lot. This dungeon is definitely one of the best examples of a Valkyrie Profile 2 dungeon. It's just whereabouts am I exactly going to put it? It's definitely going on the higher end for sure. It's just whereabouts on the higher end am I putting it, because I really do like this dungeon a lot. It's just, yeah, it's difficult to really rank this. I'm just going to put it on S tier. I think this dungeon is really good. I think this dungeon is fucking brilliant. Like, it's not like most war dungeons. It's kind of like this old temple, and that's what I really like. It's like this old temple, but it's got all these bridges that are kind of like connected to like these aqueducts, which is why I kind of compared it to Mortavia aqueducts in Castlevania Curse of Darkness. So it's not exactly an original concept, it's very similar to that, and I like how they did that for the water dungeon personally, because like there's a lot of generic water dungeons in video games, and this one I feel has a little bit more character to it because it's a temple, and it actually has quite a bit of lore to it, because if you get the Anheya canon, you'll actually find out that he was anointed on this temple. So it's actually a very important place, and there's a lot of history behind it. And for that reason, it definitely deserves to be on S tier, I would say, just simply because of just how big of a deal it is as a dungeon. So next up we have the Turgen Mine. I'm going to be honest, folks, this dungeon, when I first played the game, I completely skipped it. Because, well, I'm not really that keen on this dungeon. Really, it's probably the most boring of the optional dungeons in my opinion, and the music isn't really as great as the other dungeons. It's alright, but it's not really like the most amazing song ever. Yeah, like it's a decent song, don't get me wrong, it's still got its moments, but this is definitely one of the weaker dungeons in Valkyrie Profile 2 Silmeria, for sure. So, yeah, but whereabouts am I putting it, C or D? Well, all I'm going to say is, this is one of those dungeons that's kind of annoying, because you've got a lot of these flies that you have to fight, and like they're a pain in the ass to kill, but if you use like fire magic or something like that, they'll die quickly. But then you get the boss, and the boss is a fucking pain in the neck, man. I fucking hate the boss of this area. And the worst thing about it is, if you go to this place early and you beat the boss, your reward for beating the boss is 10,000 off. But wait, hang on a minute, you don't actually get that 10,000 off because the game is bugged and it doesn't even give you the money. Like, at least when I played it, I didn't notice any changes to my actual off after beating the boss and after like handing in the quest. But maybe that's just me, maybe I just wasn't paying attention, I don't know. But let's put it this way, I don't really have all that much fondness for this dungeon. I really don't. It's just a mine, and it's just got caverns, and yeah, it's definitely not the highlight of Valkyrie Profile 2 to me, and the boss is a pain in the neck. So I'm actually going to put this in D tier. I really don't care much for this dungeon at all. It might sound cruel, but this is ranking Valkyrie Profile 2 dungeons specifically, so obviously if it's not going to be a good dungeon, like if it's not going to be like up to par with the rest, it's going to be on D tier. Right, so we have the next field area here, which is the Sahma Desert. This area is very important in the game because this is where you get the best Anheya in the game, Zunde. But to get Zunde, you will have to get very lucky with getting him. So you have to go through this desert. It's a very straightforward path because it's a field area, but you want to make sure you get Zunde because he is amazing. He is fucking amazing, but you'll want to leave the dungeon and come back to get him, because you have to leave the dungeon on the right hand side so that you can save on the world map and then go back to make sure you get him, because if you don't, it's not going to be as easy without him. But you can choose not to get him if you want. You can get Aaron and Din if you really want to, but personally, Sunday all the way. Like, why would I pass up on him? But yeah, the dungeon itself though, the music, I love the music because the music in this dungeon, rather than going for like what Kalstad goes, the more like Arabic sort of music, this one decides to have something unique, because the music in this area, it really invokes that feeling of heat. It's hard to explain, but like the music just kind of like, it feels like a gradual, like, I don't know, like it's very hard to explain, but you can, like, the music makes you, it kind of has that feeling of just like this warm air just like hitting you, and I don't know, like the music just gives you that vibe of it's just getting warmer and warmer and warmer as you carry on. It's kind of like, what's the word for it? I mean, it's kind of like suffocating in a way, because like, it's like when you hear the song, it like suffocates you in like this, like, because when you first hear the song, like, it just gets more and more like powerful the more it hits you. I don't know, like, it's a very complicated song. I'm not an expert on music, people. But I really like the song in this area because it's a song that really invokes that feeling of heat. That's something that a lot of desert areas don't do. Usually they just go with the Arabic music, which is like an Infinite Discovery and many other desert areas. But this one is just like, it's more about that feeling of being there in the desert, being suffocated in the heat, and you're getting more and more dehydrated, and it really gives you that feeling in the music. Like when the flute's going, I think it's the flute. Like when the flute's going and it's kind of like going lower in tone, bit by bit, it kind of makes you feel like you're slowly dehydrating in the heat. I really like that little touch. Like, you really have to hear the song for yourself to really understand what I'm saying, because it's very hard to explain, but I do like the song itself. And the area is in a desert. I mean, I don't really feel that the area is as like much of a spectacle as Kythena Plains. I personally like that area more, but I still really do like this area nonetheless. I mean, I'm gonna give it an A tier. I mean, I like it, but it's not as good as the Kythena Plains. I'm giving it A tier mainly for the music being what it is, because it really is an interesting song in the game. Right, so next we have Surts Volcano Caverns. I don't know why Surt isn't here, because this is his Volcano Caverns, which is kind of funny because in Valkyrie profile he's in fucking Jotunheim, which is covered in ice, which is the ultimate irony, I guess. But yeah, like, Surt has his Volcano Caverns here. It's like Serdberg, but a little bit more interesting. It's got the lava and you have to avoid lava. It's got some really tough enemies. The difficulty gets really high and you have to really start thinking more about seal stones and strategy and all of that. Or you can just grind more and then go back and get stronger elsewhere, and when you return you'll be able to kill everything easily. But you really have to be careful here because it's really tough. And yeah, there's a lot going on here. You have to basically go around so that you can hit these frozen crystals so that you can like turn the lava into like rock, so you can actually walk on the lava, well, because it's rock now. And yeah, that's a cool concept. So you have to kind of like go around. You have to do some platforming around lava, and there's a bridge where you have to cross, and if you jump, the bridge will crumble and you like try and get back up where you were. Fortunately, the bridge returns when you go back up somehow. I don't know how it does, but if you destroy the bridge, it'll somehow reassemble itself when you return. But yeah, there's some items as you fall down if you want to get them, and then you can go back and then you can go on the bridge. And there's more Langheya to be found here as well. So it's a meaty dungeon, just like the Serdberg Mountain Ruins and the Audoula Temple on the Lake, which makes sense because it's one of the more major dungeons. And it's got a decent size to it, and it's got a nice aesthetic for a volcano dungeon, I guess, because that's pretty much what it is. And the one thing I like about this area, and the one thing I remember the most, is one of the cutscenes that plays in it. There's a song in it called Tragic Scene of Doom, and that song is really good. I really like that song, but that's a cutscene. The song itself, Raid the Mighty Force, it's still a really nice song. I really do like it. It kind of like, I'm trying to think of like an example of what it reminds me of, because it does kind of like give me like sort of like Final Fantasy 12 vibes. I don't know why, but I just kind of get those vibes from it. Like it's just a really like unique song, I think is the best way to describe it. It's really unique. Maybe Final Fantasy 12 isn't one I'm inspired by, but I just really like the uniqueness of the song, how it's really kind of like got this catchy rhythm to it, and like most songs in Valhalla 2, it climaxes at a certain point, and I kind of like that. It's not my favourite song in the game, but it does have an impact, and it does feel really good when you're listening to it in the dungeon. This is another one that is kind of like somewhere in the middle for me. Probably put it here, because as I say, it's not one of those dungeons that absolutely blows me away, but it's a nice dungeon. It's one of those dungeons that feels good to go through. It's nice to get through. It's just a nice dungeon. There's no thrills about it, but it's enjoyable for what it is. Next we have Chateau Obsession. This is a very eerie dungeon, as you're going into this old castle, and there's some lore to this place because like this crazy woman lives here, and like you can clearly see that there's been some like grim stuff happening here, like or whatever. It's one of those dungeons where it's kind of like a show don't tell sort of deal. But as you can see, if you go through this dungeon, there's a lot of cells and there's a lot of like storage crates, as you can see in the background, and yeah, it's just kind of like this sort of abandoned building that you're going through, and there's monsters here. There's not too much to say about it, but one thing I will definitely say is it has one of the songs in the game, just like the Ancient Forest, that kind of grows on you. It's one of those songs that you won't care about at the beginning because it doesn't hit you like a truck, but it grows on you, and this is one of them. It's really tense at the start, and it kind of gets that feeling of tension throughout the whole song, but eventually like it gets even better later on. And yeah, just like all the songs in Valhalla 2, like once you get to like the third quarter of the song, it climaxes, and it's just like, yeah, and it just goes back to being tense, and it's just like, it really grew on me for that reason. So yeah, where do I put this? This is actually a place that I grinded at a lot, and I mean a lot. Like, I did a lot of grinding here because I kind of just liked fighting here. I don't know why. I used the seal stone that you get here to like share experience out, so yeah, I don't mind this place. I think this is a pretty decent dungeon. When I say it's my favourite of the dungeons, I mean like I kind of preferred like the atmosphere of the Ancient Forest. I mean, this is the final optional dungeon in the game. This isn't a mandatory dungeon, by the way, but I do kind of like this dungeon for like fighting and stuff. Like, I'm probably just going to put it, I don't know, it's hard to say, because I think Serdberg's probably the better dungeon overall, but I do kind of like this. It's complicated. I'm going to actually put it here, because I feel that it's around this mark. It's a fun dungeon, and you've got like this really interesting combat arena in it, which has like this iron gate that you have to knock down, or you can just like go down the stairs and fight the enemies, and it's surprisingly open. So yeah, it's a decent dungeon. Right, next we have the Crawsus Forest Ruins, which is a great place if you want to go for a picnic, because it's just constant rain. It's like going into like the UK for like evening out. It's basically what Crawsus Forest Ruins is. Like, it's basically this marsh area which is kind of like connected to all these ruins, and yeah, it's just full of rain, mud, slop. It's basically just miserable. Like, that's the best way to describe this place. It is one of those places that is so dull, drab, and miserable that it's kind of artistic in a way. Like, it's literally a place that you really do not want to be. Like, nobody wants to go to Crawsus Forest Ruins. No one wants to pay a visit to this place because it is depressing and miserable and horrible. It's probably the best example of a dull, drab place that is artistically well made, because they really want to emphasize just how dull and drab this place is. Because not only is it full of rain, mud, and the monsters are kind of like undead monsters, a lot of them, and like you've got like water that poisons you if you put like a certain seal stone in, and it poisons the water, and you have to go through all of like the bogs, or you can kind of like jump over them and use photons to cross over them, and like you've got some Anhea, of course, as well, and there's some mini bosses that you have to fight as well if you want to get some of the seal stones, which can be pretty tough if you don't know what you're doing, because they're trolls and they can regenerate their health. But if you use a Walkflower root, which I think you can get from one of the Stropers, if I recall, then you can actually have a chance of casting, or well, of causing frailty on the enemy, which can actually make them not able to heal. So you can actually use that strategy if you want. But yeah, the main goal of this dungeon is to get 3 seal stones and put them in the dais. It's either going to be really easy or really hard depending on how many seal stones you have and what seal stones you have. If you have a lot of seal stones because you've been like buying a lot of them throughout the game, this dungeon is pretty straightforward, but if you don't, you're going to have to fight some of the mini bosses, and they could be quite difficult. And that might mean that it might be worth putting Sword Blessing in one of them and making the enemies tougher at the cost of, like, as I say, you're making the enemies tougher, but you don't have to fight the mini-bosses, so yeah. So you don't have to fight the mini-bosses at the cost of making enemies potentially tougher. That's basically what I mean by that. So yeah, as I say, this dungeon, despite how dull and drab it is, I mean, the thing that's interesting about this dungeon is that there's these pillars that are kind of laid around the level, and these pillars attract lightning, because if you play Final Fantasy X, this is basically the Thunder Pillars Mark II. That's what this is, because while you can't dodge the lightning, while you're walking around, lightning will hit you and damage you. I think there might be like a timer as to when the lightning hits, and you kind of have to get through it before the lightning hits. There's also like roofed sections that you can stand underneath if you really want to prevent you from getting hit by the lightning, but if you're not on a roofed area, the lightning can hit you at any time, so you just have to be aware of that. But if you keep the pillars up, the lightning won't hit you unless you're jumping over the pillars at the wrong time, and the lightning hits you as you jump over the pillars. So yeah, I mean, if you're trying to avoid the poisoned water by knocking a pillar over to create a bridge, that'll also cause a problem because now lightning's going to fall on your head. So there's a lot of hazards in this dungeon. It's actually quite unique in how it's designed. It's definitely one of the more memorable dungeons just simply for that, just how dull and drab it is, but how unique it is. It's one of those dungeons that will never escape my memory because of just how artistically interesting it is, while also just being miserable. And for that reason, I'm actually going to put this in A tier. I know that might shock people, I know it might, but Crawsus Forest Ruins, I mean, the music is very mystical, but also foreboding at the same time, which I love that. I love that. Like, when you go into this dungeon and you hear the music, it just really pulls you in. Like, the music just really pulls you into this dungeon and really emphasizes just how dull and drab this area is, while at the same time the mystical aspect of the song just really draws you in and just makes you want to see more and just like delve further into this dungeon, because it gives you that feeling of curiosity, like there's more to this dungeon that meets the eye. Like there's a lot of undead here, like why, and like there's a lot of dark magics going around, and like I don't know, like it just I really like that feeling that the dungeon has, despite the fact that it is literally like the misery dungeon. But they really nailed what they were trying to do artistically with this dungeon, and I totally get it. This dungeon is supposed to be grim, it's supposed to be miserable, and I really appreciate that they did not compromise on any of it, and they just made it like this grim, grand, horrible area, and they somehow managed to make it endearing, because a lot of games that have these grim, grimy areas, they're forgettable, but the Crawsus Forest Ruins is never forgettable because they make sure you know this place is not a place you want to be. You really don't want to be here. You really don't want to have a picnic in this place because, like, it would be the worst picnic you'll ever have. So, yeah. Next up we have Dragonscrypt. This dungeon is interesting because while it isn't a field dungeon and it is a connector area, it's very short, but it's very sweet. It's a short but sweet dungeon, got a really unique battle area because you've got like these kind of like step areas where you can like drop down but you can't go back up, and like there's enemies that you can get to quickly by doing that, but if they're above you have to take the long way around, which is kind of interesting. I mean, the dungeon itself, it's called Dragonscrypt for a reason because you get all these bones that you can actually use as platforms, and like there's like a lot of rock and there's a bit of sand because it's like an underwater cavern. That's basically what it is, as you're crossing underwater to get to the Palace of the Venerated Dragon. The thing that I really like about this dungeon the most is the music. This dungeon, it has no right having a song so good. The atmosphere is so serene, and a lot of this is owed to the music. It really is. I fucking adore this dungeon. I fucking do, and a lot of it is due to the music. I mean, the dungeon itself, as I say, you've got like the bones everywhere. It's really cool, and you've got little bits of like a path. Like it's kind of like you can clearly see that it's leading somewhere. Really interesting design, don't get me wrong, but the thing that stands out is the music. I fucking love this area's music. I really do. It's just so serene and calming. And just like the rest of the soundtrack, it climaxes, and when it does, oh my fucking god, this song is amazing. It fucking is. It really fucking is. And despite that it's a very simple dungeon, like, it's got some treasures, it's just very simple, but the music, man, like, the music is just amazing. I don't know why they decided to put such a phenomenal song in this dungeon. I really don't. It's just an underwater cave. But my god, they just, like, the music here is just fucking incredible. I just love when it climaxes and you can hear the fucking harp in the backdrop. Like, I just love it. I just fucking love every little bit of it. And it, as I say, it's still a really nice dungeon in terms of the rest of the aesthetic, because, you know, all the dragon bones as platforms and like you go in an underwater cave and stuff. But it is the music that sells it. The music is the best part of this dungeon. This is definitely going high up here because I really like this dungeon, at least for the music alone. But it's a very simple dungeon. As I said, there's not too much to say other than that because of how simple it is. But because I enjoy going through this dungeon a lot, I'm going to put it in A tier, because I really like it. I'm going to put it on the higher end of A tier, just simply for the music. The music in this area is just top notch, just incredible. Like, I just really love it. It's one of those songs that you can just really relax to. It's just so relaxing and calming. Like, this is one of those dungeons where the music in the dungeon can work as a standalone track, and that's all it really needs to have. Like, And it's just one of those songs that can just work as a standalone track to just relax you. I really don't know why this dungeon of all the dungeons has such an epic song, but this is Valkyrie Profile 2, people, so what do you expect, I guess? But next we have the dungeon this leads to, which is the Palace of the Venerated Dragon. This is a dungeon that's in Valkyrie Profile 1, and I will tell you right now, it is one of the most annoying dungeons in the entire game. Why? Because it's the dungeon that appeared in Valkyrie Profile 1. That's why. Oh boy, I fucking hate this dungeon. I fucking hate this dungeon. Like, this is the one dungeon that I always dread going through whenever I play Valkyrie Profile 2. I always dread going through this dungeon, but the thing about it is, and the one thing that saves this dungeon is the music. The music is fucking awesome. Like, I mean that. Like, this fucking song that plays in this fucking dungeon is banging. It's fucking incredible. It's so fucking incredible, you even think that this is the final dungeon. Like, the music is literally final dungeon music, like, and I mean that. It's like you go in here and then it just feels like you just walked into the last dungeon. It's like, this is the end of the game. You know, that sort of music, if you know what I mean. It's like, it's kind of like a homage to Valkyrie Profile 1's, like, Blameless Thoughts, which I guess is kind of like a homage in itself to, like, Irony of Fate from Tales of Destiny. Like, it's very much like that. It's kind of the evolved version of that. That's what the music is, and it's just really fucking awesome. I just love it. It's just pure Sakuraba goodness, and that's the best part of this dungeon. Because everything else about this dungeon sucks. Like, everything else about this dungeon is horrible. Like, where do I begin? Like, first of all, like, you have to find a lot of treasure chests to get these, like, keystones to access new areas or whatever. And on top of that, you have a lot of, like, trapped treasure chests, so you have to kind of, like, make sure you don't open the trapped treasure chest while you're opening them. Which is true to every dungeon, but in this dungeon you have to open some of the chests, and because some of the chests are trapped, yeah, like, it's kind of annoying trying to find these keystones. And not only that, but at the same time, on top of having to find these keystones, you also have to solve these riddles to progress, because there's some stupid fucking riddles in this dungeon, which, if you're not reading a guide, you might not even know what the fuck to do. So this is the most annoying part of the game puzzle-wise, because you have this puzzle where you have to put, like, specific seal stones, and I don't know if you have to put them in specific dices, but you have to put them in a dice. And yeah, like, if you don't know what seal stones to put in, and the clue that the game gives you doesn't really give you a good enough idea, then this is going to be a pain in the ass for you. If cryptic shit like that bothers you, you're not going to like this dungeon. And you're probably going to want to use a guide, because this is one of those dungeons that using a guide for it will make your life a lot easier. On top of this, the battle arenas for this area are very narrow, and I mean very narrow, and there's also these little pillars at the start, so the only way to effectively move your group is to use the grouping system so that they don't get trapped on the pillars. And there's usually a ton of enemies that have attack areas that are just fucking evil incarnate, that it's just so hard to avoid, and it's just like, oh my god, this fucking dungeon is a pain in the ass, man. It really is, and it's long. This dungeon goes on forever. But it's the final dungeon of Chapter 3, so once you do finish it, Chapter 3 is finally over, and it's the longest chapter in the fucking game, for God's sake. So, yeah, it feels like an eternity since Chapter 2, and this is the end of Chapter 3. And to make matters worse, to top it all off, there's these statues. And these statues move, so you'll go into a corridor and, like, suddenly this moving statue hits you, and if you don't jump over it, because you can't use your photons, you have to jump over it. If you don't jump over it and it touches you, it will teleport you into a room that poisons you. And every time you touch one of these statues, you go to the same room over and over and over and over and over again. And there's also this section where you have to, like, hit a statue, isn't looking at you, I think, or know the statues are looking at you. I forget exactly what it is, but it's just like, if you hit the wrong statue, to the poison room you go. So yeah, this dungeon really takes the piss, and it really gets kind of annoying. So for that reason, as much as I like the music of this dungeon, D tier. I don't like this dungeon at all. It's not as bad as the one in Valkyrie Profile 1, but it's still not great. Like, it's better than the one in Valkyrie Profile 1 because the music is fucking awesome in this game's version, but it's still one of the dungeons I don't look forward to in the game, just simply for that reason. But anyways, next we have the Sukavia Gorge, which is another field area in the game. I think this might actually be the last field area in the game. And it's completely optional. You don't actually have to go through the Sukavia Gorge whatsoever, but it does have one last dying hangout, which is Aegis, and you always get Aegis. I think it's Aegis. I'm wrong, but I think it is. And yeah, like, this place is fucking gorgeous. Like, I don't know what it is about the field areas and like the transition areas in this game, but they are all fucking sublime. The music in this area, oh my god. It's like an improved version of like the music that plays outside of Eroglyph. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's Christ Felon in Winter. The song in Star Ocean 3 is kind of similar to that in terms of how it sounds, but it's like a better version of that. A much better version of that. And the backdrop, like you can see in like the image that I'm using here, you can see the trees with the ice on the branches and stuff, and like as you go through it, you climb up this like hill, and then you go across this bridge, and you can see like beneath you like just all this icy landscape full of like icy woodland, and then you go all the way back down, and like it's just a spectacle, a visual spectacle. What more is there to say? Which do I prefer between this and like the others? I mean, it's very hard to say. It's definitely going here. I mean, I would put them all in S tier, these. I really would, but because they're just field transition areas, I have to put them in A tier because like it's just going from left to right. There's no real depth to it. There's not really much to it. It's very straightforward and simple, but I love the aesthetic of this dungeon so much. I fucking do. It's fucking amazing. It's really sublime, and I fucking love it. So the next dungeon in the game is the Forest of Spirits. This is a dungeon that also appears in Valkyrie Profile 1, and let's put it this way, the music in the dungeon, it was alright. Not really much to write home about, but it was alright. Probably one of the most forgettable songs in Valkyrie Profile 1 if you ask me. But the music in this dungeon, absolutely sublime. I'm just going to put it here and I'm going to explain why. I don't even need to explain why. There's a reason why I'm putting this in S tier, and I actually did an entire video explaining why I put this in S tier. I fucking adore this dungeon. Everything about this dungeon is just so fucking amazing. Like, absolutely amazing. Like, I didn't really like this dungeon in Valkyrie Profile 1, but in 2, it's one of the best dungeons in the game. Absolutely. And there's so many reasons why. And the main reason why I love this dungeon is what it represents. After the events of Chapter 4, when you get through Chapter 4, and you see what happens in Chapter 4, it is, like, absolutely heart-wrenching. And then you get to this part, and it's like the breather area. It's the breather level. And the music really emphasizes that. Like, the music is just so calming and serene, and like just the rest of the soundtrack. But I really like it because it's also really catchy as well. It's got this catchy rhythm to it. It's just a really gentle song throughout. And the lighting in this place is just so fucking amazing as well. I just love the lighting. I love everything about it. Like this dungeon is always the dungeon I look forward to going through. I always look forward to going through this dungeon every single time, just simply because of what it represents. As I said, it represents that point in the game where everything mellows out a little bit, and yeah, it's kind of like more calming and chill, which it needs to be after the events of Chapter 4. It needs to mellow out. And also because, like I said in my analysis video, which was part 3 of my analysis, the title of that video was The Calm Before the Storm. And the music in this dungeon, if you've heard the song Calm Before the Storm in Final Fantasy X, it is kind of got the acoustic in the background, just like Calm Before the Storm. It's just such, like, this is the Calm Before the Storm. That's what this dungeon is. It is the definition of the calm before the storm. The music, the atmosphere, everything. It all characterises the calm before the storm. That's what this is. And every single aspect of this dungeon is built around that. And that's why I love it. And I say that it's the calm before the storm because the next dungeon, oh boy, this is the one we've all been waiting for, guys. Probably the most important dungeon in Valkyrie Profile 2, and it's the dungeon I will never shut up about. Ravine Caverns. Here we go, guys. This is the dungeon that I will definitely say is one of the most memorable dungeons in the game. Not for reasons you would expect. If you have watched my analysis video, you will know the exact reason why this is the most important dungeon in the game. Oh, you will, because this dungeon, man, oh god. I know what the developers were trying to do with this dungeon and they succeeded, but man, did they really have to make it like this? Did they really have to? But I suppose it's worse now that I think about it. It's definitely not the worst, but in retrospect, but it's definitely not fun. I'm just going to come out and say this is the dungeon that will test you. Oh, it will. Especially if you're not using a guide. If you're not using a guide, God help you. Oh my god. This dungeon is literally the most intense thing you'll ever do in your life. Like, it really is, because you go in there and you have 8 minutes to get from the beginning of the dungeon to the end of the dungeon. And if you don't make it to the end of the dungeon within 8 minutes, it's game over. So you have to essentially get to the end, and then you realise and you look at the map. Like, you look at the little area you start at and it goes on for ages, and then you see the E symbol for the exit, and you're like, oh boy. You know, you go to the next room and it's like this tiny little room, you're like, oh shit. Yep, it's a fucking maze, boys. You have to navigate through this fucking maze full of like poisonous swamps, and I think one of the poisonous swamps has a treasure chest just perked on it, and if you open that it explodes in your face and drops you fucking down into the fucking poisonous swamps. Like, man, like, this dungeon is insane. And there's obviously some seal stones and some mini bosses as well. The thing about this dungeon is the music that plays in this dungeon. Life which seeks death, and death which seeks life, or something along those lines. My god, that's amazing, and it perfectly encapsulates the feel that the narrative is going for at this point. It really does. It just such fucking intense piece of music. And to top it all off, if you enter battle in this dungeon at any moment, even though the timer stops, the song will keep playing. The battle theme doesn't play. Like, the music from beginning to end is continuous, and I love that. I love that because this is the one time in the game, the one and only time in the game that you don't hear the battle theme when you go into battle. This song plays throughout the whole dungeon from beginning to end, and that is so impactful. So impactful because it makes you feel the tension constantly throughout, and it does not compromise. You are not done with this song until you leave the dungeon, and it just keeps that tension, that feeling of tension throughout. This dungeon, artistically speaking, it's a masterpiece. But in terms of like practicality and do I want to actually go through this dungeon? No, I fucking don't. I absolutely dread this dungeon. I really don't like this dungeon at all. I don't know how anyone can. I suppose it's a little easier when you know it. It's not like Palace of the Venerated Dragon where you always dread it every single time because it's a pain in the arse. With this one, it's just like when you're doing it first time, it's like the worst thing you'll ever do. It's pain, it's agonising. But when you know the dungeon, it's not so bad. You can actually get through it rather quickly. It's just one of those things, isn't it? Like, it's a maze and you've got a time limit and you're like, oh shit, I need to get through this area, I need to get to the end fast, and then you reach a dead end because you went the wrong way and you're like, shit! So yeah, it's just... where do I put this, guys? This is a very polarising dungeon to me. Like, this dungeon is either this or this. There's no middle ground. Like, it's definitely not going anywhere in the middle. But because I want to be pragmatic here, like, this is not really a fun dungeon to go through at all. Even though I do really respect what it's going for, I'm going to put it down here because, well, is the fucking Ravine Caverns. It's miserable. It's not a dungeon you want to spend your time going through. It's one of those dungeons that I do dread going through every single time I play through the game, even though really I shouldn't dread it anymore because I know it now. I know it well enough. So it's not really as much of an issue, whereas the Palace of the Venerated Dragon I do think is a little bit more of an issue. But just like the Palace of the Venerated Dragon, the music, fucking god tier. Fucking god tier the whole way. It's just, the rest of the dungeon is just like, yeah. It's an artistic spectacle, but it's still D tier. Sorry guys. Right, so next we have Bifrost. This should be fucking obvious, people. This is one of the best things you'll ever see in your life. I'm not even just saying this isn't just one of the best dungeons you'll ever see. This is one of the best things you'll ever see in your life, because this dungeon is a trippy, like, it's one of the trippiest dungeons you'll ever go into. I won't even call it a dungeon. It's kind of more like a field area, really. In a way, it kind of is the last field area. But the thing that's interesting about Frost is there's no encounters, but there are some fixed fights during Bifrost. So I do kind of count it as a field area or dungeon. I would probably say it's more of a field area than anything. It is, in that regard, kind of the last field area, but the only thing it does is connect between the Ravine Caverns and Asgard. So, yeah, like, I've already done an entire video talking about how much of a spectacle this dungeon is. I don't really need to go through it, or field area, or whatever you want to call it. Bifrost is probably one of the most impactful parts of the game. It's the part that I always look forward to the most. I love this part of the game, man. I just do. I just love the transitions as you go through it. You just see how, like, you go through, like, you see the forest beneath you, and then you just go up, and then you see, like, this weird aura in the sky that you go through, and it kind of, like, blurs out to create, like, a transition where you then suddenly, like, the moon just appears, and then you just walk past the moon as it kind of like eclipses as you walk by, and then suddenly as it eclipses you can see this floating island just slowly show up. I just love that. It's going through the stages of getting from Midgard to Asgard, and they do it in the most beautiful, the most phenomenal, the most incredible way possible. And I just fucking love it. Now, the thing about it is you won't be able to get the best experience of this area until you walk the bridge a second time, because of the enemies that you encounter, because there's some fixed encounters. And yeah, like, there's just, like, I think there's, like, a bunch of regular enemies, and then there's, like, a mini-boss, and then there's a boss fight. That's all there really is here gameplay-wise. Other than that, it's just walk to the right and watch the atmosphere as you walk to the right. Just watch the background slowly begin to change. But that's what Valkyrie Profile 2 is all about. That's what it's all about, people. That's what you're playing this game for moments like this. This is the selling point of this game. This is it. This is why you play Valkyrie Profile 2 Silmeria. And that's why it's S tier, because it's the best example of what Valkyrie Profile 2 can bring to the table. It is Valkyrie Profile 2 at its finest. That's what it is. Right, so next we have a proper dungeon. Probably the best dungeon in video game history. Or at least the second best dungeon in video game history. Yggdrassil. Oh yes. This place, man. Oh my god, this has to be the best dungeon of all time. It has to be the best dungeon of all time that isn't a final dungeon. That's the thing, I want to say that this is the best dungeon of all time, but I know it isn't. I know it's not the best dungeon of all time, I know it isn't. But it damn well has every right to be the best dungeon of all time. It damn well does, because this dungeon is fucking amazing. It is perfect in every single way, it does everything right. Like, it's probably the most technical of all the dungeons in the game, aside from, like, the bonus dungeon. Like, this is probably the most interesting of all of them, because not only do you have a lot of, like, jumping platforming, but there's also towers that will shoot, like, these elements at you, and some of them spawn monsters, and you have to, like, slash at them to shut them down, and you can shoot photons at them as well to shut them down. And there's a lot more emphasis on, like, photon puzzles here and photon platforming. Like, this is the quintessential Valkyrie Profile 2 dungeon. It really is. It absolutely is, and it's pretty huge. It's a pretty large dungeon, and there's a lot to see in this dungeon. There's a lot of like different sub areas in it. Like you've got the outer section where you've got like these floating platforms which kind of like jump across the platforms, and as you jump across them, like it's kind of like you're using them as like a step, like or a stairway up the tree. And then like as you get to a certain point, you can go in the tree and you can see like from the inside of the tree, and then when you get higher up the tree, you start to see like these like photon particles, or at least I assume it's photon particles, in the background. It kind of looks like you're underwater. It kind of does. It looks like you're underwater. It's kind of interesting, but you're not. Like, it's actually like, because you're going up a tree, what they've done with Yggdrasil, instead of like having leaves, you have like all these photons in the sky above you. At least I assume that they're photons. So it looks like you're underwater, and it looks like there's these little particles in the background that just like all over the place, like, which I assume is kind of like representative of leaves. If you look at my YouTube avatar, you'll see them in the background. That's what I'm talking about. Like, just right behind Lezard's face, there's all these like particles behind him. Those are the particles I'm talking about, because that, my avatar pic is taken from a cutscene that happens in Yggdrasil. So yeah, that should tell you all you need to know about why it's S tier, because I love this place. That's just talking about the visuals and the gameplay. That's before we even start on the music, because the music in this dungeon, it tells a story. And it purposefully tells a story, because there's actually two songs in this game. There's Start Up from Prolonged Darkness, which is the second track that plays, and then there's the first track, which is No Knowledge of Wisdom. No Knowledge of Wisdom is one of the most phenomenal songs I've ever heard in my entire life. That song, man, and it's phenomenal just simply because of how it relates to the game. And obviously this is a spoilery video, so I'm going to give away some spoilers to explain why this is the way it is. If you didn't want spoilers, I do apologise, because this is going to be spoilery. But, like, when you reach Asgard and you've just gone through the Ravine Caverns, and you've taken in all of Asgard's sights, and then it's like back to business now. Like, we've had our fun, time to carry on the dungeon and settle the score once and for all, you know. And the music just fucking emphasizes that so much. Like, you go from like the most serene thing, and then suddenly you go into the dungeon and it's like the most uplifting thing ever, but at the same time it's also really like intense as you go further on, and it kind of emphasizes like the challenge of doing this final climb to the top of this tree. It really is kind of foreboding, because if you've played the game and you know what happens, then you know why this song is so important. Because this is pretty much the grand finale of the game. Or so it should be. This is it. Like, you are going up the tree to attain the powers of the gods. So you're excited. You're excited because it's thrilling. You're finally here. You're finally here at the place that you've wanted to go to, where you can finally become God, and you can finally stop Odin and end his tyranny once and for all. This is it. This is the finale. But at the same time, it's a difficult trek, and the music emphasizes that. Particularly in the second half, where it climaxes, the climax section of the song really emphasizes just how much of an arduous task this is. And it also kind of not just emphasizes that, but it's also foreboding, because when you reach the top of Yggdrasil, guess who's waiting for you? Odin is, and he's not going to let you get your fucking power, is he? Oh no. And if you know anything about Odin in Norse mythology or in Valve profile, you know that he's business. You don't fuck with Odin. He is a bad motherfucker. He is a tough motherfucker, and the thing I love about this place is because, like, in Valve Profile 1, Odin is such a dick. Like, he's kind of like a smarmy dickhead, but he's kind of not. He's kind of like, he's one of those people that, like, misleads you into thinking that you're doing a noble task, but in truth, he's actually just using you, and he doesn't really care about you. He doesn't really care about anybody. Like, he just wants to use you for his own ends, and you know, that stings, and that makes you really hate him. So he's already a hateable character if you play Valve Profile 1. But in Valve Profile 2, he just goes even further. Like, he's just extreme in this game. Like, oh my god, like, he's just willing to just destroy everything and kill everything at one point. You actually see what he's really thinking, and you can just see how little of a shit he gives. He literally pulls a Lord Farquaad in the game, where he's basically just like, some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. Like, he's literally that. Like, he literally says that at one point in the game. Not those literal words, but he says something along those lines, and it's just like, yeah, this guy's a dick. So if you didn't play Valhalla Profile 1, you already hate him enough just simply for that. But if you play Valhalla Profile 1, you hate him even more. But there's one thing you never get to do in Valhalla Profile 1, and that's actually fight him. This is the moment in the game where you finally get to settle the score with this bell end, and you finally get to beat the living fucking shit out of him for all of his injustices and everything that he's done, all of the horrendous acts he's committed, and just all of the evil deeds he's done towards mankind, and how he stole the Dragon Orb and how that's fucked the world of Midgard and made it slowly die and deteriorate. Like, this is revenge for everything that happens in Valhalla Profile 1. And if you play Valhalla Profile 1, you know exactly why this fight is so important, because Valhalla Profile 1 is miserable. It is a miserable game, it is a depressing game, it's a heart-wrenching game, because the world is so dark, grim and depressing. Like, we're talking fucking berserk levels of dark here, folks. Like, that's what Valhalla Profile 1 is, and when you finally see this motherfucker who caused all of that bullshit to begin with, you want him dead! You want to fucking murder the bitch! And the music, No Knowledge of Wisdom, when it climaxes, it's kind of foreboding to that confrontation, that inevitable confrontation with Odin that is slowly creeping its way into the song, that's reminding you that, yeah, sure, be excited, the power of the gods is nearby, but what's also nearby is this motherfucker who's got insane power that's going to fuck you in the ass with his fucking spear. So you better be ready for him. And that's what I love about the song. It's just one of those songs that really drives the narrative. You don't even need dialogue to explain what this song explains, because this song tells you everything. This song, like I said, it tells you a story. It tells you that you're nearly there. It tells you that you've just got one last climb, one last obstacle to overcome, but it's the toughest obstacle yet, and when you reach the top, you're about to face the ultimate bad guy, the big bad, and he's waiting for you. And I just love that. I just fucking love that, and that's why Yggdrasil is S tier. Fucking masterpiece of a dungeon. Absolute masterpiece of a dungeon. Once you get through it, you somehow end up here, in Valhalla. Yeah, remember the area that you start in the first Valkyrie profile, right at the beginning of the game, where you don't really get to do much, you just get to walk left or right on this bridge, and then you just see cutscenes, and then eventually just straight on Midgard. Yeah, that's one of the things about Valkyrie Profile 1, you never actually get to really explore or roam around like Valhalla or Asgard at all, whereas in Valkyrie Profile 2 you do, which is Yggdrasil and Valhalla. You finally get to actually go to Valhalla and explore its halls and see all of it for yourself. And you don't actually get to see the throne room, which is a bit of a shame. Like, that would have been cool if that was there, but you still get to see the rest, and this is ornate as all hell. The music in this dungeon, man, oh my god, it is grandiose. Especially when it climaxes. Oh my god, when this song climaxes, it makes you know just how grandiose this place is. This is the home of the gods. This is the palace of the gods. This is God's palace that you are walking in, and this song that plays in this dungeon really emphasizes that you are in the palace of the gods, the realm of the gods, and just how grandiose that is. Not to mention that this palace, because of how ornate it is, it's shiny, it's pristine, it's just a really nice place visually for that alone. If you want the shiny and like pristine aspect of Star Ocean, like the modern Star Ocean games like Star Ocean 6 and stuff, where you see a lot of that sort of thing in Valkyrie Profile, this is it. Like, because it's just so, I've always liked that sort of like shiny, pristine aesthetic. I know it's not for everyone, I know like people like the more gritty and realistic sort of thing, but this is where the game, because you're on Asgard, it's kind of a little bit more on that side of things, and it's kind of to separate the fact that you're no longer on the world of mortals. Now you're in the realm of the gods, so of course it's ornate, of course it's grandiose, and you know, you look at the carpet, it's got this, it's red carpet with this gold trim, and it extends on the stairs, and then like you see all these pillars and everything, and candles, and then you go into the rooms that the Einherjar live in, and it's got libraries, it's got tables and chairs, and then you go around and you see like suits of armor and all these little details, and like this is a great dungeon. This is an absolutely great dungeon, but would I put it on the same level as Yggdrasil? Probably not. I like this dungeon a lot. I do. It's a big dungeon as well. There's a lot to do here. There's a lot of treasure. There's some seal stones as well. There's some fights to do because of the dragons that are patrolling the fucking corridor. Like, it's crazy really, because like this is where the Einherjar live. Like, think about it. Like, when you become an Einherjar, you live in a dungeon. Pretty much, because the fucking Einherjar are just roaming around these corridors where these fucking gigantic dragons just patrolling like the area. And like, God forbid one of the Einherjar opens one of the fucking treasure chests in the fucking place, because they'll fucking probably get fucking gas in their face. I guess Odin's really protective of his artifacts, so it makes sense, but damn, like, who's putting all these fucking booby traps in fucking Valhalla? Like, seriously, like, what if one of the Einherjar that's bad, just somehow curious and just wants to take a peek inside? It's gonna fucking kill him! Like, Jesus Christ, it's kind of funny that, like, it's kind of terrifying in a way that you're pretty much living in a dungeon if you become a fucking Einherjar. But yeah, we're going to put this in A tier. I'm not going to put it in S tier because I feel that these dungeons are a lot better personally, like, but I still really like this enough to put it on A tier. It is definitely on a high A, but it's not like the best of them all. I really love this dungeon a lot, don't get me wrong, and it's a huge dungeon, there's a lot to like about it. It's just not a personal favourite of mine like these. And I think it's because of the impact these have on me, which this one doesn't have, because, like, while it is still a really nice dungeon, like, I just love I love this atmosphere so much, and I love the music a little bit more. I still love the music in this area, don't get me wrong, it's awesome, it's epic, but I just love this song for different reasons, because of just how chill and serene it is. And this dungeon, man, this dungeon is a masterpiece. This is spectacular. This is phenomenal. This is just a really good dungeon. So I put this in the A tier. I really like this dungeon. And finally, as I say, major spoilers, because this is the final dungeon of Valkyrie Profile 2 Silmeria, the Tower of Valeth. Yep, it's his tower, folks. It's his tower, not yours. You can't have it. It belongs to Valeth. But the thing about it is this is kind of interesting, because it's called the Tower of Valeth, and if you actually go on the map, it's actually located where the Tower of Valeth is located in Valkyrie Profile 1. But the thing about it is the Tower of Valeth is a dungeon in Valkyrie Profile 1, and you'll go into it in Chapter 4, and if you leave the dungeon at any moment during the time that you're in it in Chapter 4, you miss out on Ending A. If you finish the dungeon and you've never left, you actually, like, perform one of the requirements to get Ending A, so you actually have to go through it. All I'm going to say is Tower of Valeth in Valkyrie Profile 1 is hell. It's an awful dungeon, and it's way too long, and it's fucking boring, like, because all of the areas, it's like the same fucking thing, copy-pasted for ages, and like there's tons of enemies that you have to fight, and they take fucking forever, and they're so fucking annoying. It's an absolute fucking nightmare to get through it. And once you do, you'll feel kind of relieved once you get from one side to the next because of how long it is. But in Valkyrie Profile 2, on the other hand, it's the final dungeon. And it's a completely different beast. Oh my god, where do I even begin with this dungeon? Once again, I did an entire video dedicated to this dungeon. That'll tell you everything you need to know about this dungeon. This dungeon is the best dungeon ever made. absolutely the best dungeon ever made, and this is why Yggdrasil can't be the best dungeon ever made, because this dungeon exists. It's that simple. This dungeon is a masterpiece. This dungeon is phenomenal. This dungeon is perfect in every single way, with one exception. Every single treasure chest in this dungeon is booby-trapped. Why? Because this is fucking Lezard's dungeon. Do you think Lezard, of all people, is going to leave any of those treasure chests without a trap? Of course not. He's going to make damn well sure that every single one of his possessions is booby-trapped so that he can make you suffer more. Because that's what Lezard's all about. He just loves to make people suffer. He loves to play little tricks on people and screw them over. So of course every single treasure chest in this fucking dungeon is booby-trapped. What do you expect? But other than that, like, this dungeon's amazing. This dungeon just feels like a journey through Lezard's mind and his subconsciousness. That's kind of how it feels, at least to me. Like, that's what it feels like. Like, it might say Tower of Lezard Valeth, but it's not an actual, like, typical tower that you would kind of, like, expect. What I feel that he's done, even though the game doesn't really tell you, I kind of mentioned it. Given the name Tower of Lezard Valeth, it's highly likely that he's essentially taken his tower from the first game, but he's got all these runes in this tower, which is kind of weird, isn't it? And he's gone back to his own world, assuming, like, and he's kind of like opened up this pocket dimension, because this is one thing that Lezard said. He said what the king was planning to do was to set up a new world tree free from the gods and mortals, and that's what this is. This isn't a tower, this is a tree. This is another Yggdrasil. That's what it is. This is a huge tree that you're climbing, but it's called the Tower of Lezard Valeth probably because the tower that he was in, because of all the runes, I'm actually of the assumption that he transformed that tower into this through magic. I believe that because this is Lezard Valeth, people. He can do anything. He can do anything he wants, and because he's God, he now has the power to actually do that on a massive scale, and he can make his dream world. This is not the Tower of Lezard Valeth, as you would think. This isn't even just a Tower of Lezard Valeth. This is Lezard's world. This is his utopia. That's the point. Because Lezard succeeded in doing what many other villains in video games failed to do. He created his own world. Like, that's what all villains dream of, and he succeeds. He's created his own universe. This is his world. This isn't just the Tower of Lezard Valeth. This is the world of Lezard Valeth. This is the utopia of Lezard Valeth. This is his world. And that's why I like to say that this entire dungeon is literally you exploring a physical manifestation of his subconsciousness. Because what else is it going to be? I mean, like, he literally thought this up. Like, there's no other way he could have created something without having any form of thought about what he wants it to be. And I feel that this dungeon was created from his inner thoughts and was meant to kind of like replicate the tone of his mind or something. Like, that's kind of what I believe. Like, it represents his inner thoughts in a physical manifestation. So you go through the stages. Like, on the bottom floor, it plays like a really tense and kind of fast-paced track, and like, as you can see, it's kind of like got all these fluttering particles and stuff, and like you can see it on here. That's what the bottom floor looks like. But then you go on to the next floor, and like the music changes with each floor, and it's just like the music just carries different emotions and feelings with each floor. And the reason why I actually believe that this is a representation of Lezard's subconsciousness is because the top floor fully emphasizes his narcissism. And it makes sense that it's the top floor because that's where he is right now. It's the one that is the most dominant of all of his subconscious thoughts, because he is the ultimate narcissist and he is one. And the final area expressing his narcissism and just how much he loves himself and just how grandiose it is and how everything is just coated in fucking gold nectar and it's just like pouring down everywhere, and like this guy fucking loves himself, and he loves himself so much that the dungeon itself is a fucking visual treat. it is a visual spectacle if I've ever seen it. But the final floor of this dungeon plays a song which is titled Ascend into the True Faith. That's my favourite song in the game. I love that song so much, man. And the thing about it is all the music in this dungeon, it's basically like the same song, but different. Like, it's a bit like, kind of like what they did with the Lost Forest and the Royal Underground Path. It's the same thing where it's the same song, but it's played differently, in completely different tones. And I love that. I fucking love that, how it has different variants of the same song for each floor. I fucking love that. And the top floor is just such an epic variant. And my god, given the nature of the game at this point, and the nature of the story, and everything that happens leading up to reaching this top floor, oh my fucking god, nothing hypes you up more for the grand finale of Valkyrie Profile 2, because I will definitely say this right now, and this is the reason why this is the best dungeon of all time. The finale of Valkyrie Profile 2 is the best finale in video games. This is the ultimate climax. This is it. I don't think there's ever been a moment in gaming that I've ever felt the way I did when I reached this part of the game, because I was so fucking hooked into the game at this point. I just didn't want it to end. This climax is just so engaging. It's impossible not to be engaged in this part of the game. Like, at least to me it feels that way, because so much is happening, so much is going on in such short span of time, and as you're going through the cutscenes, you're going through each area of the tower, and you know, oh my god, like, there's just too much. I think that's the thing about this dungeon, there's just too much going on, there's just too much here. I mean, it is the final dungeon of this game, of this amazing game, of my favourite game of all time, so of course it has to be something special. It has to end on an epic note, and my god, does it fucking ever. This is just the best fucking moment in gaming, or one of them. Like, either that or Bifrost, it's one or the other, but man, this climax, man, you are so pumped up for this fucking climax. I cannot stress it enough, and this dungeon does a fantastic job at doing that. This dungeon just tops it off. This dungeon is the cherry on the top, where it has multiple dungeon layers, like multiple floors, each with their own track with its own tone, and like the third floor of this dungeon as well has a much more mellow and more relaxing tone, and it's kind of more melancholic as well, which is interesting. I love that. Whereas the other ones like are more like foreboding and tense, and then you've got the top floor which is like epic and like grandiose. And like, the thing about this dungeon is it was like an escalator. My engagement was already high enough after fucking dungeons like Yggdrassil and Valhalla and Asgard and Bifrost, and then suddenly you get here and this dungeon's like an escalator of engagement where you just get more and more engaged, and it just builds up more and more hype the further you go in it. And the thing about it is, when you finally beat the game and you get the fucking ending, it just comes crashing down. And I don't mean that in a bad way, even though I can actually kind of see why it could be a bad way, but man, I don't think I've ever felt the same way I've ever felt about a video game than I felt about Valkyrie Profile 2's finale. Like, oh my god, like, that finale hits you like a truck in so many ways, because it just really hypes you up, and then you just, like, the finale and the ending, like, just, it hits you like a truck, you don't see it come. And it's just like, it's like a punch to the gut, sudden punch to the gut where you're winded. It's just like, oh, you know, like, you're just like, what the hell just happened, you know? Like, what the hell is that ending? But I think it's intentional. I think that's what they really wanted to do. I think they wanted to make the ending feel that way. Especially when I look at some of like the Shmupulations interviews where one of the developers said one of my favourite scenes in the game is the ending scene and the tone that it has and everything else, and they said we got it right, and that tells me, yeah, they were intending on doing that. They wanted to make you feel that feeling of emptiness and kind of sorrow by the end, and when the end credits play, it's just like, it just hits you, you know, like it hits you, and it's just, that's just the magic of this game, people. That's why I fucking love this dungeon. As I say, I'm just basically recapping my analysis at this point, people. My god, I can't not bring this up, people. It's so amazing. But we aren't even done. We've got one more dungeon to do, and that's the Seraphic Gate. I mean, we obviously have to mention the Seraphic Gate somewhere, don't we? Oh, God, I'm not going to see. I'm just trying to like get my point on it. But yeah, the Seraphic Gate. So this is the bonus dungeon of the game, and it's huge. You'll spend a lot of time in this dungeon in the post-game. Now, is it my favourite Seraphic Gate? No, that would be Covenant of the Plume. But, is it a great Seraphic Gate? Absolutely. This dungeon is a lot of fun. There's a lot to do in this dungeon. There's a lot of tricky puzzles, and there's some really tough fights. And, like, the dungeon itself, like, there's 5 floors. It's not too long, but it's long enough, let's put it that way. And it's like just more of what you would expect from Valkyrie Profile 2. Basically, it's just like if you like Yggdrassil, you'll probably like this. But it's a bonus dungeon. There's no narrative involved. It's just all silly nonsense. If there's any narrative, like this is basically where the game developers got to have a little fun and take the piss out of themselves and their own work. And I really appreciate the fact that Tri-Ace are able to like make fun of themselves, and this is one of those dungeons where they do, and I love it. They have a pretty crazy sense of humor. That's one thing I will definitely say. I just like how the developers are self-aware about how ridiculous their games can be at times, and just like making all these silly jokes in the fucking doghouses and stuff, and like how they're taking the piss about how fucking Brahms is a fucking edgelord, and they're just making like the most lamest character ever in the fucking Seraphic Gate. Like, because Brahms is unarmed because he's way too damn cool to have a weapon. Oh my god, this guy doesn't need a sword. This guy just needs his bare knuckles, and he can just punch people into oblivion. Like, he can just punch people into the floor and then punch the ground to cause a fucking tremor that sends their body skidding across the floor in a bloody mess. This guy is someone you don't want to fuck with. And in the Seraphic Gate, he's a fucking joke. They make a complete mockery out of him. It's hilarious. Like, they also make a mockery out of Lezard as well, but they really laid into Brahms. Like, I feel so sorry for Brahms because, man, he just gets the piss taken out of him because he's the edgelord of the game, and they're just like, well, aside from Dallas, he's like even more edgy, but yeah, like, Brahms is actually cool, so it's just like, let's make this super edgy character into like this really dumb, stupid, like, pathetic character, and they did. Like, because he's unarmed, and this is what I love, like, all the characters have like these weapons that are made out of like all this crappy material, so like these makeshift cosplay weapons, because they're all cosplaying as the characters. And because Brahms doesn't have a weapon, and yeah, like, because they're a cosplayer, they have to have something to fight with because they're not badass like Brahms. So his weapon of choice for entering battle, and these are kobolds, by the way, that are all dressed up as fucking as the game's cast. I fucking find it's so fucking funny, man. And fucking Dog Brahms' weapon of choice is a fucking ham! Literally! He fucking walks at you with a fucking ham and tries to prod you with it. And most of the time, like, if you barely get into his attack range, he'll miss you, and you just get AP for free, and you just wail on him. It's so hilariously dumb, but it's hilarious just how stupid he is and how he always gets the short end of the stick in this story. Like, they really give Brahms some stick in this story. They really do. But yeah, like, that's just like the narrative aspect of this dungeon. As I say, like, the dungeon itself, it's a really fun dungeon to go through. Like, there's a lot of rooms and a lot of fucking treasure. There's some seal stones. Like, you can get some of the best weapons in the game here. Some from treasure chests, some from drops. There's a lot to do in here, so you'll spend a lot of time in the dungeon. But how is the music? Well, the music is typical Sakuraba, isn't it? Which, for Valkyrie Profile 2's standpoint, it's not top of the line, is it? But does that matter? It's the bonus dungeon and it's fun as hell. The question is, where am I putting this? Well, that's a tough one. I mean, given the fact that the music isn't as good as the one in the A tier, part of me is thinking that I should put it in B tier. Because, like, I really do think that it's good, but not really the best, because the music isn't as awesome as like the others, but I still really like it and I still had a lot of fun with it, so I'm going to put it somewhere in B tier, probably on the higher end of B tier, but probably not the highest. I'll probably put it here. Yeah, I think that's a good place to put the Seraphic Gate, because I do like the dungeon. I still think it's a fun dungeon to do. It's just, in my opinion, like the other dungeons are just like have better music. That's the only thing that's holding it back. The music, like, I just love this game's soundtrack, people. So like, music's a big deal to me, and yeah, when you're comparing it to those soundtracks, yeah, I can't really put them higher than the other games because, you know, like, the music is just so fucking good in them. But as a dungeon, it's still a very good one. It's just that, like, Yggdrasil is the total package, you know? So is this. Like, I think, mechanically speaking, Yggdrasil is better than Tower of Valeth, but I like the Tower of Valeth a little bit more. But these two are very close. Both of them are like the best dungeons ever in video game history. So, you know, like, it's very hard to decide which one is better. But it's a very close call. Whereas this one, as I was saying, like, all of these dungeons that are in the A and S tier are in there for a reason. It's because the music in these dungeons is fucking amazing. Like, this is one of the most, in terms of music, it's one of the more basic tracks, and that's kind of why it's in B, because it's really good, it's really fun, but at the same time, the music just, and, you know, the landscape, because it's like the same, like, areas, although there are a few different areas inside the dungeon, it's just like, you know, like, because it's so long and you're seeing the same locations over and over and over again, it's just like, yes, you do get some different areas when you go into like the puzzle rooms and stuff, but it's kind of like the same atmosphere throughout for the most part, and that's the one thing that may be a little bit of a, like, knock it down for people, but I don't think it's that bad because, like I say, it does have the puzzle rooms. It's just the music. That's the only reason why it's only on B, but I still think it's on the higher end of the B tier. So there you have it, people. There's my ranking of all of Valkyrie Profile 2's dungeons. I mean, really, like, and here's the thing, right? And like I say, when I'm very critical here because I have to be, because I'm ranking dungeons here. But like, the music in this game, like, I've just gotta say, even the dungeons that don't have amazing tracks like this and this, you know, like, they're still good. They're still good songs. It's just that they're not the best songs, and that's the thing. It's like Chateau Obsession. Like, this song, it grows on you over time, you know, and I feel that's the case with a lot of the music in this game. Like, it gets overshadowed by the better songs in the game, by the standout songs, but, like, it's one of those soundtracks that you really have to listen to a lot. And if you do, then you'll have much bigger appreciation for the music. So yeah, that's my ranking video on all of the dungeons in Valkyrie Profile 2 Silmeria. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you all next time.